all of this is about the male gaze. Hello, my name is Jamie Saul. I am a writer, director, and today, actor. I'm going to be talking about the character of Ophelia in Hamlet and breaking down her speech in Act 2, Scene 1, where she talks to her father Polonius and tells him about when Hamlet appeared to her and seemed in quite a bad way. I've got my notes here so I don't forget anything, so that's what I'm looking down at. Let's do it. So, I think the first thing to talk about, if I was directing this, where I would start would be by talking about what the immediate circumstances of the scene are. So when and where are we? We are 2 months-ish, a couple of months after the first act. There's this big gap that happens, and Ophelia actually draws attention to this later in Act 3, I think, that there's been about 2 months since old Hamlet, Hamlet's father, died. What we know about Ophelia so far, we've seen her once before. She was talking to Laertes and Polonius about Hamlet and about her love for Hamlet and their relationship and whether that is something that they should pursue. It's later revealed that Hamlet sent her love letters, that there's been something going on between these two. So I think it's important to know that before we hear this, because it means that the two characters are really familiar with each other. They know each other well, and I think that's key. Because what she says is would be quite distressing for anyone, but I think it's especially distressing because she knows this person. So, yeah, we're Act 2, Scene 1. So I think it's important to talk about how Ophelia enters the scene. She's coming in and she's incredibly distressed and scared and shaken up by what has happened, and I think completely justifiably so. I think anyone would be, because she's just seen her friends, or her kind of more than friend, in an incredibly bad way, and appear to her, behaving incredibly strangely. And Ophelia says, "My lord, as I was sewing in my closet." So immediately we're starting off with two things. So my lord emphasises her place in the hierarchy compared to Polonius. The fact she's a woman saying this is important. As I was sewing in my closet, this is quite a stereotypical symbol of the archaic role of a woman, I think. Lord Hamlet with his doublet all embraced, so Hamlet's appeared with his shirt undone, I guess. No hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, ungartered and down gyved to his ankle. So he's not wearing a hat. His stockings are down gyved, they're hanging down, they're fouled, so they're dirty, they're ungartered, so they're not properly worn. Thus, I guess they've fallen down. And he's appeared like this in this sorry state. And I think it's interesting as a modern audience member, reader, whatever. This is all quite unfamiliar. And I think this is one of those things that really dates the play, because we don't wear hats everywhere, so it's not weird if we're not wearing a hat. It's not weird if we're not wearing stockings, so it doesn't matter whether they're fouled, let alone down gyved. Pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, so he's scared by something, he's affected by something, and with a look so piteous in purport, that repeated P sound, it's like she's spitting this out, she's trying to get this information out. Piteous in purport, as if he had been loosed out of hell to speak of horrors. He comes before me. So the interesting things about this, as I say, piteous in purport, I think it's like she's spitting this out, she's trying to get this information out. She's almost reliving this, what happened, as she's telling Polonius and us as an audience. Her objective, I think, in this scene is she's seeking comfort and explanation for what's happened, and she's almost here trying to explain it to herself, I think, as much as to her father. And it's all very quick. The speed of it really helps emphasise this. There's no full stop until the very end of this little bit. It's all kind of carrying on from each other. All these images are cascading into one another because she's still thinking about them. They're all playing on her mind at once. And she's trying to lay it out in a way that makes sense to Polonius, but also to herself, I think. He comes before me. So we don't actually find out what he's done. We found out about what he looks like and how the way he has appeared, but we don't know that he has appeared really until the end of this. We an audience knows because it's obvious that she's seen him, but we have to wait for her to reveal this information. And then the second part of this contrasts that. In the actual script, there's a bit of dialogue between her and Polonius here, but we've cut that for this. The next speech is all about concrete things that have happened, actions that have happened rather than just describing an appearance, which is what the first one does. He took me by the wrist and held me hard. That's a really important symbol of male power, I think, of her being subject to this man. He's come into her closet where she's sewing, and he's looked very upset and weird and has seized her arm. This is quite a kind of domineering thing to do. But I think, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, we only read it as that because we know that she's a woman. So for me to play this as a man, I think this meaning changes. I think Ophelia in the play is presented as this kind of pure, innocent character. And so him just appearing and seizing hold of her, I think is incredibly, would be incredibly distressing for anyone. But I think it's, bearing in mind where she sits in this hierarchy of people, bearing in mind the fact that, she's in love with him, bearing in mind the fact that he is in love with her, it's a really weird thing to do. Then goes he to the length of all his arm, and with his other hand thus o'er his brow, he falls to such perusal of my face as he would draw it. So, what she's saying here is that he's come and he seized her by her arm, and now is staring at her for such a long time that it's like he's trying to remember her, to be able to draw her. And I think that idea of remembrance is really important. There's the implication here that he is mad, or there's some form of madness, and it's like he's trying to recognise her. And it's interesting that we see this from another point of view. We see Hamlet's madness quite a lot, but he keeps telling us that it's a performance. And this is, I think, a confirmation that it maybe isn't entirely that there is some element of him having been properly affected by this grief from his father's death and everything going on. Long stayed he so. Again, he's staying there for a long time. It's weird, isn't it? At last, a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head thus waving up and down. Again, this is really quick, isn't it? And thrice his head thus waving up and down. Notice the iambic pentameter. And thrice his head thus waving up and down. It's trying to, pick up the pace of this. He raised a sigh so piteous and profound. Piteous and profound. We go back to that word piteous again. It's P sound. He's trying to spit this out, this information out. Piteous and profound. And notice the word perfidious. Notice the word piteous. Piteous is a word that she used to describe the way he looks at her. All of this is about the male gaze. The male gaze, though, reported through the person the gaze is directed at, reported through the woman, which is such an interesting way to look at that. And I would argue that Shakespeare doesn't really utilise that as much as he could do. I think he could more obviously draw attention to the fact that this isn't good or right, the way that Hamlet is treating Ophelia, or the way he does at all in the play. And I don't think that's made explicit enough for the audience to most obviously make that connection, unless it is really highlighted by the production, as it did seem to shatter all his bulk and end his being. So he sighed in a way that is like he's releasing his soul, which is an interesting way to describe this. It's shattered all his bulk, his bodily frame, his body is being deflated by this, shattered by this. It's more active than deflated, yeah. That being done, he lets me go. He lets me go. The power is all with him. And with his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes. For out of doors he went without their help, and to the last bended their light on me. So he's staring at her still. Again, the male gaze. It's still all about him looking at her and her complete discomfort at this. And not discomfort because of who it is, but because of the circumstances around it. He is acting weirdly. He's entered her personal space and taking control over it. And I think it's only natural that she's completely shocked and disturbed by this, and she wants to tell someone about it. Unfortunately, she tells Polonius, who assumes that this means Hamlet is in love with her, which he probably is. But I don't think this is a clear indication that he's in love with her. This doesn't scream this is someone who's in love. This screams this is someone who needs urgent help. That's the speech. As I say, I think it needs to be performed in a way that's really quick, that really emphasises this lack of punctuation. it all kind of runs into each other because these are all these thoughts, all these fragments of thoughts that are all part of a wider thought that Ophelia is having as she is going over this information in her mind. She's, as I say, she's processing this. And I don't know that emotion hugely changes. I think it swells as she recounts certain things. When in the second part, when she starts talking about the specifics of what's happened, when he takes her by the wrist, I think that's one of those points. He comes before me, I think, is one of those points. These things that we might call events, where new information, concrete things have happened and are being described as they happened. He raised a sigh so piteous and profound, I think that's another one. He seemed to find his way without his eyes, for out of doors he went without their help. I think that's another one too. And I think towards the end she kind of is quite consumed by this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. I think speech is indicative of Ophelia's wider role in the play. She is, although we're hearing about it from her, and it's a really clever storytelling device this actually, we're hearing about it from her, but she is not part of the action. She is a subject to the action. It's happening to her, not with her. And that is what happens so often with this character in this play. I think it would be really interesting to have a male Ophelia and female Hamlet, because there is this sense of those two characters mirroring each other. They both are grieving. They both have this descent into something that we call madness when we talk about this play, which I think is problematic. In modern understanding, we would never call someone mad just because they've been affected by something awful that's happened. So it's interesting to play this as a man versus as a woman. It does change how it appears, I think, and it does change what the speech does. Because the speech is not specifically about female experience. It is because we view it through the lens of Ophelia, who is a female character, but it doesn't have to be, and that changes the way it is perceived and the way it is its role in the play. It's not like Lady Macbeth talking about motherhood. The character isn't forced to be a woman by what she says. But if it was a man, that would really change things, I think. And that maybe says things about, the way we still present women in drama and in theatre and in performance, and our understanding of what womanhood is. I think women in Shakespeare are not one of his strong suits. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching. I hope that was informative and helpful, and I hope you have a great understanding of the character of Ophelia in this portion of the play. I would really urge you to go and watch or read this play and form your own opinions about Ophelia. And I would really urge you to, if you're approaching the play, try and approach her character in a way that is more three-dimensional than purely the way she is presented in text. Because I think there are gaps that can be filled in to make her really interesting. But unfortunately Shakespeare doesn't do that for us. Thank you so much for watching.
My lord, as I was sewing in my closet, Lord Hamlet, with his doublet all unbraced, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, ungartered, down-gyved to his ankle, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous in purport as if he had been loosed out of hell to speak of horrors. He comes before me. He took me by the wrist and held me hard. Then goes he to the length of all his arm, and with his other hand, thus o'er his brow, he falls to such perusal of my face as he would draw it. Long stayed he so. At last, a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head thus waving up and down, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound as it did seem to shatter all his bulk and end his being. That done, he lets me go. And with his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes, for out of doors he went without their help. And to the last, bended their light on me.